So good morning and happy homecoming week. So I hope to not bore you and keep you too long today. Maybe there's some homecoming activities you'd like to participate in today. Let's get started. We're going to continue our discussion on arrays. Last class period, we talked about the following things. What do we talk about? The symbols, the notation. Why in the world would you want to use an array, right? The justification for using arrays when we want to associate more than one value or element. We want to associate that with a single variable, right? And so in order to do so, we need to declare that particular variable as an array, right? An array, a collection of elements. If you do not do so, and we do that, how do we let the computer know that we're dealing with an array? Those open and close brackets, if you recall, right? We know that this is not allowed. We cannot reference more than one element using only a single variable. We need to specify that it is an array. All right, so we looked at the various notations, right? We learned about how to declare an array and there are various approaches to doing so. We learned about how to initialize arrays one way. We're going to talk about another way to initialize arrays during today's class. But during our class period, our last session, we talked about different ways to assign values to arrays, literal values to arrays, and the notation that involves. And so, yes, that's where we left off. We left off and wrote a simple program. So today, let's continue our notes here. So today, what in the world are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about how to populate and access one or more elements in an array. Okay, how do we do that? How do we populate and access, right, one or more elements in an array? And we can do that. Let me see if I have any responses here. What do you think we need to do in order to access and populate more than one, right, one or more elements in the array? What will we need to introduce? Any ideas, any takers here? Any ideas? It's something we learned in the last lesson, actually. So here's the answer. We need a loop. The answer is we need a loop. And specifically, of the three loops, which loop do you think we will need? We have three types of loops that exist: a while, a do while, a for. Which do you think is ideal for an array? What type of loop do you think is ideal for an array? You have three choices. I need some answers in the chat here. Let's not wait on me. I will wait on you. Which type of loop do you think is ideal for a for loop? And hey, you can also look it up. How about that? How do you think of do while? Okay. Everyone should have a choice. There's only three options. You can put it in the chat for me, please. I'll wait for you. Okay. We only have two responses. I need more class participation. I think that's why I'm hesitating, because it really, we're not showing our videos and we're not responding to it does enhance class participation when we're more responsive and okay, so we have all three there, three responses. A for loop is going to be ideal for an array. So let's put that here. So we need a for loop. And why specifically do you think it is ideal? So why do you think any ideas on why? Why do you think a for loop is ideal? Why do you think it's ideal? Anybody have a clue? What is the nature of a for loop? Provides control over the index. Okay. And don't we tend to know exactly how many elements, right? That are in an array, right? Or, and I shouldn't say exactly, at least up to, right? So again, that is a good reason why it's a deal, because it allows us to allows to access each element in the array, because the computer will know how many elements are allowed in the array. That's why, because again, even though you may not know, so for instance, when we declare an array, as you saw in the previous examples, where we declared an array, here's your notation, we had to specify the size of the array. Remember, I stated that the size of the array is not inclusive. So it means that up to that 7. So we write where the index is 7. So this tells the computer you can store up to that number. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say inclusive. It tells the computer up to that size, right? Up to and inclusive. So you can store up to 7, including 7 elements in the array. But you may just store 1, and that's fine, or 3, and that's fine. But what this tells the computer is what to look for at the most, right? But if we define or initialize our array at the time when we are declaring our array, as you see right here, the computer will know exactly how many elements are in the array, because the property length that we discussed the last class period, the property length will be assigned a value. For this example that you see here highlighted, the property length is going to be assigned the value 3. And we don't have to do anything. That property will be set because we're assigning literal values to this array of strings, the string array. And so again, I just want to emphasize that the for loop. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at the for loop and how we can use the for loop. And that's why the order we had to talk about loops first before we begin our discussion on arrays. And so here, the for loop, right? So that for loop is ideal because of the control variable. That the control variable that we will be that we are very familiar with, right? That CV in the for loop will serve as the index used to access each element in the array. That's what I want you to be mindful of. So whatever that, so when we define what our control variable is when it's associated with an array, that control variable is going to help us iterate through the array, point to each element in the array. Okay, so let's look at how we would use a for loop to access. You can use a for loop to populate an array as well as access. If you see here, right here, we can use the for loop to populate an array as well as access an already populated array, right? Access. And so here, let's look at using the for loop, which is using the traditional for loop. We'll talk about, there is a special type of for loop that you're going to be introduced to in lesson 6. But we'll look at that if we have time, we'll look at that today. If not, we'll do that on Tuesday. But definitely the for loop. So let's look at first how to use the traditional for loop, the for loop that we learned about in lesson 5, okay? And how we would use that for loop to access elements in the array or populate an array. So here's the syntax. Let's look at the syntax first. We're familiar. This is nothing new. We're familiar already with the for loop. So remember the keyword for. There's our open and our closing parentheses. There's our open and closing curly brace, right? This is the end of the loop, right? And so what's going to be inside of the for loop, the parameter for the for loop is where we're going to initialize the CV. That needs to be there, followed by a semicolon. Here where you have a condition that in using our CV, right? And then where are we going to do, and the last and third statement that's in the parameter is where we update the CV, okay, without the semicolon. So this is what we have for the parameter for the for loop. This is what we learned in lesson 5, right? We've got to initialize the CV, condition that uses the CV, and update our CV. And then what goes inside of the for loop is what's inside of the body. So know this is the body of the loop. And this is where we will either populate, where we populate or access elements in the array. Okay, that's what takes place inside of the body. This is where we'll populate the array and or access the elements that are in the array. All right. And so what I want us to do is we're going to use an example to go over to discuss how loops are used to access elements in the array and populate an array. And so here, let's do the following. If you can follow along on your modules page. If you go to your modules page, there are some in-class activities that I want us to use to discuss for loops and how we use for loops to access elements in the array. So you can look at where it says lecture notes and in-class activities for lesson 6. If you click on that link on your modules page and you scroll down, if you go to, let's see here, our lessons, programming challenges 1 through 3. I already have that open. So, but programming challenges 1 through 3. Let's examine this first challenge. Let's look at this first challenge. We'll see how many, we'll go over several challenges today, but let's go over, use this example to learn more about how we use loops with arrays. Okay, let's first take a look at the problem together and then we'll set it up. So here the question says, or the problem says, find the total number of even integers in a list, okay, of 5 numbers. And so here's what I want us to do. You can see what the output should look like. So for instance, let's say the list contains these 5 numbers, then the answer would be 4. Here's an example of what our output should look like. We're going to prompt the user for 5 integers. The user enters 5 integers. We're going to populate our array, and given the values in the array, we're going to then determine, we're going to access each element in the array and ask the question, is it an even integer? Give me just a second. Okay, so here's where it's located. I have a question here, so let me go, no worries. So we went to the modules page, okay? On the modules page, if you go down to lesson 6 on the modules page, there is, if you click on the link that says lecture notes and in-class activities, okay? Then you should see the in-class activities 1 through 3, programming challenges. I hope that was helpful, right? In lesson 6, okay? Awesome. And so I hope everyone understands how this problem works. Let's work on this problem together here. Let's right click and create a new Java class. And in this, let's call this particular exercise even num. Okay. And in this problem here, let's go ahead and make sure we have our main method. There's our main method. Okay. This is going to be an interactive program, as we know. As we can see, we're asking the user to enter a list of integers. And so we are definitely going to need, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and make sure that we import our scanner object, right? So this is an interactive program. So we need the scanner class. So here's our import statement in java.util.scanner, okay? Because this is an interactive program, we're going to need to read whatever the values that the list of integers that the user enters from the keyboard. We need to grab those and store them in our array. All right, so hopefully you have that. Let's go ahead and comment our closing curly braces before we get any further here. So this is the end of main. And this is the end of the class itself. All right. With that being said, let's comment here for the purpose of this program, right? Purpose of this program is to demonstrate, first of all, it's to demonstrate how to access or rather populate and access elements in an array of 5 integers. Okay, that is the purpose of this exercise. Let's talk about here, and here's what I want you to think about when we go through this exercise here. What are the inputs to this problem? So inputs, what are we going to process? Given those inputs, what are we going to process? And then what's going to be our outputs? So let's define what those are first before we move any further. This is where we're thinking through the problem. We've not written a lick of code. Okay. So given this problem, we know that what are our inputs? Our inputs are going to be 5 integers. The user has to enter 5 integers. So the user enters 5 integers. That's going to be the user inputs. So given those 5 integers, what are we going to do with those 5 integers? How are we going to process those 5 integers? We've got to store, first of all, we've got to store the 5 integers, right? The 5 integers in an array. That's one thing. What else do we have to do? The next thing we have to do, not only do we store them in the array, we've got to then determine whether access, we'll say access, or point to rather, right? When I first say access, just means point to. So access each element in the array and determine, I say to determine if the element is even, okay? If the element is even. Now, and then once we access each element in the array to determine if it's even, what do we want to do? We've got to keep track of that. We've got to keep track of that. We've got to count all even integers because we need that final value. So that's given these 5 integers, we've got to store them in the 5 integers into an array. We've got to access each element to determine if the element is even or not, and then count as we go along. What are the outputs? What are the outputs given these inputs in processing? We want to output the total. We're going to output got to print to the screen, print the total number of even integers. Okay. And those even integers are nothing more than elements, right? Or those elements that are in the array that we determine that are even. So that gives us an idea, right, of what we're looking for. So now let's kind of outline. Again, we're not writing code yet. So again, what do we need to do here? We're gonna need to declare some variables. Given a set of variables, right? Those variables, and a part of that declaring variables is also we've got to declare our array that's going to eventually store those that list of 5 integers, right? That collection of 5 integers. So we've got to also declare, not initialize, because again, when will we finally initialize the array? Put that in the chat for me, please. When in the program will we initialize or populate the array? When would we populate the array? When will that take place? Why can I do that now? After prompting the user, absolutely. We've got to prompt the user. And so we're going to be using a loop. So here again, so that we know we're going to need this is an interactive program. Let's go ahead and create the scanner object for sure. After we create our scanner object, we are now ready and poised to interact with our user. And so here, let's go ahead and give our user a good prompt. We got a prompt user for 5 integers. Then after we prompt our user for 5 integers, we've got to read. But we're going to be reading the elements that the user wants us to put in the array. We're going to be reading them using a loop. So we've got to use a for loop, right? We've got to use a for loop to populate the array. Given the user's inputs. Okay, so this is we're going to use a for loop to populate our array. And so that means whatever, we're going to read it from the keyboard. So given the user's inputs, that means we're going to read and store, okay, from the input stream. Given that, so now at this point in our code, we'll talk about the way the code is written, but at this point in our code, our array has elements in it. It's already populated. And so what do we need to do from there after we use we've populated our array? We can do several things. And let me just make this very clear that there's more than one way to solve this problem. I'm choosing to use this approach for demonstration purposes for sure. So here, I'm going to use another array. So I'm going to use a for loop. Again, there's more than one way to do this. We use a for loop to determine if each element is even, and if it is, then we need to increase the counter. Counter is whatever we're using to count the number of even integers in the list. And so after that for loop, after that particular for loop, now we know the total number of even integers in the list. And we're ready now to finally, outside of the loop, print the total number of even values. Okay. All right. So with that being said, that's our guide. This is our guide. We may have missed a few things, but at least most of it is spelled out. And that's what I want you to do, to be mindful of. And what we're doing right now is what you need to be doing when you're working on your own, right? Well, that's why I do these exercises in class to demonstrate how you should approach a problem. Given a problem, what do? We think it through and design a solution to solve that problem. We need to identify which steps need to precede the other steps, right? And so very, very important. So what variables, put in the chat for me, please. What variables do you think we may need for this problem? Are there any variables that you think we may need? An int, all right, Danielle, what is that int for? Give me a good name naming convention, what is that integer going to be used for that you propose? Good idea. What do you think the integer is that we need to introduce? Any ideas, anybody? The numbers in the index, okay. Okay, so you're talking about the for loop, the integer for the for loop, okay. Okay, the index, we will definitely, and we can declare that variable here, or we can declare it when we define when we introduce our for loop. Very good. Any other variables? Any other variables? This sounds like a homework problem. So the total number of even, okay, the total number of even, absolutely. And and what is this data type going to be? What do you think its data type is going to be? Tyler, what do you think its data type is going to be? Tyler? Not sure? Okay, Jake? Do you have an idea of what the data type is for the total number of even integers, this variable that we need to introduce? Anybody have a clue? Garrett? Morgan, I know it's a direct message there, but you said integer. Morgan said integer. It is going to be an integer. Think about this. If I count anything that I count, if I want to count the number of apples, right? The number of apples, what will I need to do? Start off at 1, 2, 3. We don't say 1.5 or right. If we're counting the number of even integers, you're fine, Morgan direct message I accidentally, but yes, Morgan said an integer. So this variable is going to definitely need to be an integer. We can say total even, maybe something of that nature. And so this is going to be the variable that's going to count. Now let me just say this. We call this an accumulator variable. I'm going to and I'll explain what I mean by accumulator variable. We've got to give this variable an initial seed. Everybody write this down, please. This is so important. Could it also be an array, an int array? So that we are going to have to define an integer array. That's separate. But what I'm saying is a simple variable. Other than your array, what are the variables that we may need outside of an array? And total even, this variable is going to be needed because it's going to, please make note of this. This is what we call a accumulator variable. You may hear this again. Okay, it's accumulator variable, which is what? It's a variable that has the potential to grow every iteration of a loop. It has the potential, right, to grow at every iteration. So what do I mean by that? And there's certain things we need whenever we are using a what we call an accumulator variable. We've got to do the following. Sorry, let me just do this. When you use an accumulator variable, when used, we must give this type of variable an initial value or seed. This is so important when seed before using. Now, why are we giving it a seed? Because think of it like a plant, right? We put our seed in the ground, we put it in some soil, and it has the potential to grow, right? And we use accumulator variables with loops normally. And so accumulator variables, again, may or may not grow or be modified every iteration or of your loop. It depends on some condition. And so this is but when you have a variable that has the potential to grow or to accumulate, that you got to give that variable a starting value. It's like 0. 0 is inconsequential, right? 0 is not going to hurt anything. And so here is a good, so you've got to determine what you need to initialize that accumulator variable to. But for this particular problem, 0 works, right? Because I want to count the number of total integers in the list. If I have a list of 5 integers and none of them are even, the value is going to be, then the last value of total even is going to be 0. They're none. So if there are even integers in the list, then that value is going to increase inside of our loop. 0 is how it works. Okay, so we need this variable to keep track of how many even integers that are in the list, if any. And then we've got to declare our integer array. So here we know it's going to be a collection. So here's how we tell the computer it's a collection: int and then the brackets, or we say int the name of the array and then the brackets. Either way, but we've got to give our variable name. I'm going to just say user inputs. Okay, that's going to be the whatever the integer, the 5 integers that the user enters from the keyboard. And then we've got to complete our declaration for our array. We always know we use that keyword new. And then what do we say? It is an integer, right? Data type collection. And how many integers should the computer expect or reserve space for? 5, right? The problem says 5 integers. Okay. So this is how we declare a collection of integers, a variable that's going to point to and reference up to 5 integers in this collection. We already know how to declare our scanner object. We can do this in our sleep. Right? We know how to do that. So there's our scanner object. All right, thumbs up if you're with me so far. All right, okay. So now, as we move forward, let's give our user a good prompt. We already know what the prompt should look like. I asked the user to enter 5 integer values. Let's do that. So here's our prompt. So system.out.print. I'm going to simply ask the user enter 5 integer values. Okay, colon and a space. And there we have it. So there's our prompt. We're asking the user to enter those 5 integer values. Once we have those 5 integer values, well, once our prompt rather, then we've got to retrieve them using some loop. And so this is a familiar. We know how to prompt the user. We know how to retrieve values from the keyboard, but we've got to retrieve those values from the keyboard inside of a loop, and specifically a for loop. So let's set up our for loop first using the traditional for loop. We'll talk about next class period how to use the enhanced for loop specifically for arrays. But so this is the end of the loop. Okay. And now, what in the world here? So then help me define my parameter list for this for loop. It's the traditional for loop that we learned in the last lesson. So here we're going to need some type of control variable. I'm going to call my control variable index. You can call it anything, cat, dog, I, J, whatever you want to call it, but you've got to be consistent. You all tell me where in the world, where should I initialize? What should I initialize this variable called index to? Remember, right now we're populating. I'm going to grab the value that the user entered on the keyboard one at a time, and I'm going to place it into my array, starting where? Starting at the what value? Starting at the what position? The 0 position, absolutely, absolutely. So here, I need to put that first value, first element that the user enters on the keyboard, I need to store it at the 0 index, which means that I've got to start my control variable at 0. And then you all help me out here. As long as index is what? Help me. What is this condition? that involves my control variable, that will assist me, that's going to help me move my pointer to the next index so that I can then put the new value in. So as long as index is what? Help me with this conditional statement that involves the control variable. As long as the index is less, you have less than or equal to 5, okay? And we're starting at 4, starting at 0, right? So you could say less than, we could say less than 5. Does that make sense, everybody? Because we're starting at 0. Yep. The user's inputs, well, no, but here are your options. Let me show you some options that we have, and I'm going to actually put them in the comments here. We could say for the condition, we could say the following. We could say as long as index is less than 5, that's one way. Or we could say as long as index is less than the length of my array. The length of my array. How do I say the length of my array? How do we say the length of the array? We did it last class period. If you recall the types of cars, if I wanted to know the length of the types of cars, what did we do? Here's our array, and I used the property length. We did this last class period. Do y'all recall this? So we could say that here as well. We could say whatever the array name is dot length. That is what we could use as well. And I'm going to use that because that is safer to use, actually, because the computer will know the length of this array. It will know as the user, as the user's inputs are entered from the keyboard and stored in the array, it's going to know the length, right? It's going to know, it's going to eventually know the length of the array, okay? Well, it knows the length of the array because I specified it actually right here. Is everybody good with that? When I declared the array, I told the computer, hey, expect up to 5 elements. And so that's what it's going to use. And then what is the third value in the parameter? We know that the third value in the parameter is where we're going to walk one step closer to my upper limit. What is my upper limit? The length is of the array. That's my upper limit. So when we do this, what's going to take place inside? That's every iteration. I want to retrieve from the keyboard that integer and store it into the array. And so how is that done? So here I'm going to write the right-hand side of the assignment statement first. We're used to doing this. Aren't we used to saying scnr dot next int? Right? Because we're reading integers from the keyboard. We're used to this right-hand side of the assignment operator. Now let's write the left-hand side. You may not be as comfortable yet with the left-hand side. How do we put each value that we retrieve from the keyboard in a position, specific position in the array? We say the following. We say user inputs at, and whatever the current index we're on. Please make note of this. I'm going to put a little comment right here. How do we reference? Oh, I'm sorry. How do we reference, or how do we point to a specific how do we point to a position in the array using a generic statement? How do we do that? We do that using the following. We'll say whatever the array name, right? The array name bracket, whatever the index is, whatever the CV or index is, closing bracket. This is how we state a point to a position in the array at in a generic form, okay? This is how we do that. And because we say whatever the array name and then whatever the index, because whatever the index is going to change every iteration. So the first time through, we're saying user inputs at 0. The next iteration, we're saying user inputs at 1. The next iteration, we're saying user inputs at 2. And each time we're putting a value in that specific location within the array. Please, please, please. Does everybody understand what we're doing here? We're storing, I'm gonna say here, we're storing, let me put here, read and store each value or input in a specific location in the array. That's what we're doing in this next line of code. So after this point, you all, here's where it's a good time to perform some type of unit testing. It's a good time to test, to see right now, what should I have accomplished at this point in the code? I should know, at this point in the code, my array should be populated. The user inputs array should have values in it. So let's test right now. Let's stop right now. And you should do this on your own when you're working on your own. So for testing purposes, let's verify the following. Does the array, or is the array populated? Does the array have elements in it? Okay, that's what we're testing. Let's go ahead and print let's print the fourth element to the screen for testing purposes only. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say system.out.print ln. I'm simply going to test to see if it had the fourth element. So I'm going to say the fourth element is : and this is just for testing purposes, you all. But again, it's a great idea to do it right now. Don't write your whole program and find out at the end that you have an issue populating the array. Then the rest of the code is not going to work. So let's verify. How do we give me the code, please, really quickly here? The code that I would write right here to print the fourth element in the array. These are the kinds of questions that I could ask you potentially on an exam. Please, please, please. Help me out here. All right, we did this last class period. I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait. And I love that the class, I love that those dedicated people in the class that respond, but I need everyone. And I'm going to start calling names. Okay, I need everyone to you're not sitting here just typing, you're participating in class. Okay, so I have quite a few names here that I never see a response from in the chat or mute yourselves or show you videos. I pay attention to all of that. Okay, so I'd like, when I ask questions, even if it's wrong, we'll fix it. But I do encourage you to participate in class, right? Not just show up. All right, so Hedda, you mentioned that it is user inputs at 3, and that you're so correct. Because we want the fourth element, and it's going to be the third index. Very good. And so let's go ahead and run this code. And so we're testing various things here. We're testing to see that we can grab the user's inputs from the keyboard and we can store them successfully, store them in our integer array. So you're going to enter whatever number of values you want, but as long as there are 5 values that you're entering from the keyboard. And the fourth element in the array, given these set of inputs, is it giving me my expected output? So 1, 2, 3, 4, that is correct. Okay, so we have written the code, right? We've written the code successfully. The array is populated. You can go ahead and comment that test statement out. Okay, and we can move along to the next section of our program. Here, the next thing that because our array is populated, we just verified that we are now going to determine whether each of the values in the array are even or not. We're going to ask that question. And so We're going to use a traditional loop. Now, what you could do is watch what I'm going to do to save time. I could literally copy and paste the previous traditional for loop that we use. I could copy and paste that same for loop, but get rid of what's in the body of the loop, right? It's going to be the same for loop, basically, right? Traditional for loop is going to help me access and increment through my, iterate through my loop to touch every element in the loop. We use this for loop above to put the elements in, but we're going to use this for loop to ask the question. And again, there's more than one way to do this. I just want to make that very clear. I'm using this approach to demonstrate how we could use for loops with arrays. So help me out with, please. I'm going to need your help with what's going to go inside of the body of the loop. What do we need inside of the body of the loop? We need to determine if the current element, and what I mean by the current element during this iteration, right? If the current element is even, and if it is, increment the counter variable. Okay. What counter variable did we use? We define our counter variable up here as total even. That's that accumulator variable. I'm just going to put a little note here for myself that that is going to be my counter variable, which is total even. That's what I used, right? To keep track of how many even elements are in the list. My accumulator variable, which is the accumulator variable. Okay, I want to tie all of this together. So I need your assistance. What type of structure am I going to need right here to test to see whether, to check to see whether the current value of my variable, the current value of my, that I'm pointing to in my array, if it is going to be even or not. And so you say, so if you're very close, yes. Yes, absolutely, maybe. So yes, you're going to need an if statement, a standalone if statement with. So here, and you, because it's just one line of code, you can omit the open and close curly braces for sure. There are certain, so you use your variables. We've got to make sure that for consistency's sake. So how would we determine whether the current value that I'm looking at is even or not? Unlike, instead of saying I, what would we say? We would need, this is how we say the current value right here, which you see highlighted. This is how we say the current value that I'm looking at. So all I need to do is say user inputs, right? User inputs. If it is mod, or it mod 2, if it is equivalent to 0. Does everybody understand how this is written? If the current value, and how do we say the current value? I'm going to put this in the comments really quickly here, because I need you to be familiar with this, because your lab assignment may need this. So how do we say the current value can be represented? Is represented by the following. We say the following. We say user inputs at whatever the current index is. Okay, that's how we say the current value. The current value at this iteration, during this iteration. So whatever that current value mod 2, if it's equivalent to 0, then come inside and increment my counter. And what is going to be the counter? What variable is going to keep track of how many even integers? This is the variable that's going to do that. I'm going to increment that accumulator variable. Okay. I hope you can see there. And this is the end of, yes. Okay. So everybody take a look and digest this. What are we doing here? We are checking to see whether the current value in my, or current element that I'm looking at in my array, we're asking the question, that value, that element, mod 2, if it's equivalent to 0, meaning it leaves a 0 remainder, then I need to come inside and increment that accumulator variable called total even. I need to increment it by 1. If it's not, just keep moving. There's nothing to do. If it's not an even integer, then this condition is going to be false, and we do not increment that counter. Okay, so after this loop executes, we will know how many even integers are in the list. So we're going to print that to the screen. And according to my output here, we need to print the total number of even values in the array is. So the total number of even, right? The total number. What's that? What's that? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at my at the chat here. So the questions, I'm a little confused about mod 2. It just checks the remainder after divided by 2 is 0. Okay. But thank you, Anthony, for that explanation. Awesome. High five, you all. No coder left behind. And I love it. I love it. Thank you. So the total number of even integers, thank you. The total number of even values, right? The total number of even values. Okay, just so my output matches in the array. In the array. All right. And so what am I going to do here? I'm then going to concatenate that with the last value that's going to be stored in the variable called total even is going to print to the screen. Total is going to print to the screen. Does anyone need, this is probably the most challenging part in the program, right? Does anyone need a further explanation? I know that there was a chat in the discussion in the chat. Does that answer everyone's questions about why we wrote the statement? This is how we determine whether a value is even or not. Remember, if it's odd, what if I wanted to know whether the value is odd? What do I need to change right here? If I wanted to know whether the current element is odd, we would say whatever that current value is mod 2 if it is equivalent to what? Right here. What would I change if I wanted to say odd? We went over this when we went to modulus. Absolutely. We would say 1 here. Is everybody with me? If we wanted to ask the question if the current value is an odd number, we would say whatever that current value is mod 2 if it's equivalent to 1. That says odd. If it's even, then it's equivalent to 0. That means the remainder must be equivalent to 0. The remainder is equivalent to 1 when the divisor is 2 for odd integers is 0 for even integers. Very good. All right, let's run this code and let's see if we are working, if it works. We're successful here. So just put in, please, 5 values and let's test to see if given these sets of inputs, we get the expected outputs. So I'm going to count here. There's 36. That's even. 5 is not. So 36 is even. So increase my counter to 1. 5 is not. So my counter stays the same. 12 is even. So my total even increments now to 2. 7 is not. So I do not modify the total even variable. The last one, it is even. And so my total even variable now increments to 3. And so the final value of that total even is 3. So you can see, given these sets of inputs, it does give me my expected outputs. All right. Any questions or concerns about this exercise? Questions, concerns? All right. So next class period, I'm gonna let you go a little bit early, but next class period, let me just say this. Next class period, what are we going to do next class period? We're going to introduce quite a few things here. We're gonna, oh, not quite a few. We're gonna wrap up lesson 6. So lesson 6, the last few items in lesson 6 that I want to discuss. Let me do this, sorry. Hold on just a second. So next week, we're gonna talk about the enhanced for loop. Okay, if I look at your textbook, we're going to talk about the enhanced for loop, and we're going to talk about multi-dimensional arrays, so multiple arrays as well as 2-dimensional arrays. We'll talk about that on Tuesday and Thursday of next week. Remember, your assignment is not due until the following Monday. And so be mindful of that. But we are going to talk about next week on Tuesday and Thursday. We're going to talk about enhanced for loops as well as multiple arrays, using and accessing multiple arrays at a time. And then we'll also look at two-dimensional arrays. Okay. So, hey, it's been a pleasure. You all have a great homecoming weekend. Be safe. And I will see you this time but on Tuesday next week. So you all take care. All right.